Hello, this is Sebastien. I'm the artist for Alchemic Cutie, and there's been a lot of changes to the game since we started working on it several years ago. And one of those biggest changes is in the tile map and or really the entire world art for the game. And this video is going to compare the alpha artwork with the current artwork and basically go over why those changes were made, what the changes were, and hopefully give some insight on maybe some artwork for your own game or your hobby, or whatever. Maybe you'll learn something. So on the top left is going to be a collection of screenshots from the alpha build from around November 2018. Then on the bottom right, we're going to have a collection of screenshots that are from the most recent build, so actually August of 2020, but I put March 2019 down there because that's really when the revision happened. Now in this case, we only are going to compare the alpha footage to, well, the alpha screenshots to screenshots from the summer season, because there were no other seasons in that alpha. So, in the first, in this first set of images, we've got the farmhouse with the farm area around it, and right away, you probably can tell that the colors are much more vibrant in the revision for all the new tile maps and stuff. And also, there is some level of simplicity that was added to the new tiles and new objects and stuff. So the fencing is different, the trees are different, bushes are somewhat different. A lot of the colors are pretty straightforward. Dirt is yellow, grass is green. It's not a kind of desaturated, kind of in-between colors or anything like that. And another thing to note is that the houses are in the new screenshot. The house and just about every other structure is made out of tiles first, and then any additional details, like for example the sign, are added later once that's turned into its own sprite. So, and the reason for doing that, rather than doing completely custom sprites for all the buildings and other kinds of objects like that, is if you make a mod for the game, you can use the tiles from the tile maps to make a structure. It'll be exactly, more or less exactly what's in the game, because that's the process I use to do it. Again, trees are much more, I would say they're simpler. The shapes are more obvious. There's the 3 clusters there. And another thing that changed is the shadows, which you won't be able to tell here, but the shadows react to the characters when they get near them, rather than being a single just background circle. That's a sprite on the map, and it looks a lot better that way. And we can also just use the tile textures to make the shadows, and they'll be more integrated with each other. You don't run into issues of overlapping alphas, like darkening each other and things like that. So overall improvement. The next set of screenshots are from the indoors of the farmhouse. In the original alpha, the farmhouse was an upstairs, which was a house, and then downstairs, which is the shop. Now, in the new, in the updates, we split the farmhouse into just the farmhouse and then another location for the shop. And those also would include the grandparents at the shop and then your own family at the farmhouse. So when we split those two locations, we assign those to different characters as well. So again, colors, much more vibrant, much more clean as far as separation of objects. You notice that there's a lot more outlines on the background elements. And those background elements would mean like the bookshelf, the kitchen counter, the stove, fridge, shelves, the table and the cushions. So there's a lot more separation between all the elements, which makes them, I think, stand out more. And the colors obviously stand out more fun to look at. And I think probably cuter to have vibrant colors than something that's a bit muted. And then here's an example of the changes between the shop. So again, the different elements of the background are more easily discerned from each other. And again, all of them were turned into tile elements. So again, if you made an indoor location in a mod, then you would be able to create something that looks just like this. There are no custom objects in this screenshot. These are all from tile maps. And this is another example from the town square in the bottom right, and then the original alpha farmhouse, just to show, just to show what the farmhouse used to look like and now what it looks like when we separated the location into the farmhouse and the shop. So you'll see that there's that large window on the bottom floor. That's the storefront, and we have that in the shop as well. Also, just a lot of new tiles and stuff for the planters in the town square, for the cobblestone on the pathways, the water. So lots of new updates, lots of new tiles, much more colorful. And here is an example of cliffs. So on the top left, you'll see on the top of that screenshot, there's a large cliff face separating the low ground with the sand and water, and the high ground where there's the trees. And in the bottom right, you'll see cliffs separating the ocean from the walkable area above it. And this is probably, aside from the color changes across the board, this is probably one of the bigger changes to the world art. And the reason it was changed is was to limit the number of tiles needed to make cliffs and rocks and other kinds of things like that. So if you look at the top left, there's specific tiles for the front face. There's a different shade of tile for the diagonal face. And if later on you'll see some for horizontal or completely vertical faces, the back angle of that face, and then again the back of that face. So really there was about 5 different sets of tiles for the cliffs that all had to have a certain number of variations to them. That would have variations for plants growing on them, and holes in the cliff, all that kind of stuff. That ended up being a lot of tiles, And if there would ever be revisions or updates to a tile, that's a lot of work to revise all of them. So what was done was the tiles were turned into colors and then geometric shapes. So here, there's this light brown tile, there's a darker brown tile, and then a darker one. And each of those colors can be used to create the different angles of a rock face. So here, you notice it's darker, the detail is darker. And then here, it's much brighter, and the detail is only slightly darker. So you can make an entire cliff face with just using different colors without having to have all these different parts, different tiles for the texture and all this, and it'll still look convincing. It'll still be detailed enough that it'll look like cliffs and that it'll fit in with the other tiles here that are also simplified representations of grass and stone and all these things. What really allows us to do that is having simple two-tone diagonal triangles for tiles. And this tile here is the exact, okay, so this tile is exactly the same as a tile below it. It's just two different colors and rotated. So all of these are done with probably the same 3 or 4 tiles, just at a different shade of lightness or darkness. And that gives us way more flexibility in creating different shapes and contours to the rock face than if we had done it like up here in the old screenshot with very specific tiles. Because if you'll notice, it's just diagonal. So I think that's probably one of the biggest improvements, aside from color, of course. So also note that the water is much less detailed compared to the new tiles. And you won't be able to tell in the screenshot, but the waterfall is animated, the coast, the edge of the water is animated, the transitions of the water are animated, and in the alpha, it's just the very edge. And there's also no tonal difference between the water to show different levels of depth. So next is a couple screenshots of the forest. In the alpha, there was a overlay similar to what we have in the current screenshot. I wasn't able to get that to display in the when I was getting screenshots, so it looks a little bit better than this. But here, the big change is removing the vast majority of the objects. So all of the forest trees and grass and everything were added as objects, which number one is bad for performance, and number two ends up turning into a you don't get clear borders on the playable area. So if you look here, it's like, okay, well, there's some trees here. Can I move through this little corner at the bottom? Can I move over here? Can I fit in this little bit? You're not going to be able to have functional boundaries, at least visually, with just using objects like this. The other problem is when you have so many objects, it just tends to muddle together and not look very clean. You tend to get the image just gets like very flat when you have so much texture like this. And if you look at the new screenshot, you'll see that all of the trees that are basically making up the non-playable area are created out of tiles. So none of these are objects. These are just tiles, and it's very easy to see where the playable area is. You have this area with mushrooms, you have this area with these flowers, this area over here, and then there's little paths that you have to discover to move through these areas. So that's the biggest change, is having tile maps to represent the non-playable area that would be completely blocked by trees. Also, there was an update to the forest overlay for these bright spots where the sunlight can go through the branches, and it was updated to have a bit of a light bleed on the edges. Okay, this is an example of the marsh area, much more simplified. There's just, when you have to make an entire island instead of just an alpha area, it's better to decide, exactly how detailed things need to be, especially with this kind of art style. And it does not need to be nearly as detailed, or I say detailed, have as many different tiles in as small an area as this. This is pretty cluttered. The grass was also updated, so it's not so, it doesn't stand out as much and really dominate what you're looking at. The water, again, there's different levels of darkness to the water, so this isn't like a deep blue water as though it's very deep water, or the sky is very dark. So yeah, that was pretty straightforward. And then just some more examples of some other areas outside of the main area. So you'll notice that this is outside the farm. There's a flower field there. That's an actual area. It's probably 3 or 4 maps in total instead of just the one in the alpha. And the big difference is just that there's not a million flower tiles everywhere. Pretty overkill. And then this last image is of the Jelly notebook, which was actually much more stuff that changed. But I just put, since most of the stuff that changed isn't even available in the alpha, I just thought I'd bring this up. Big difference is going to be the portrait. There's actually specific sprites for jellies and portraits now. There used to not be. There's a menu for changing the accessories, and energy was removed some time ago in development because it was just redundant, and we had room now for displaying the medals that your jellies can win from competitions. So that's everything, I think. Again, the reason all these were changed is because it needed to be changed. Let's see if I can... The old stuff was just not cute enough, frankly. Yeah. Tom wasn't completely on board at first, because you don't ever want to hear from your artist that, hey, let's just redo all the art for the environment. But I came up with some screenshots, and we agreed that it was much better than the old stuff. Much more interesting to look at, more fun to look at, and much easier for mapping and modding later down the line. So I hope that was useful.